OCD tendencies growing up,
Right.
like borderline, clinical. They never really overtook my life.
Right.
But like I would check like the alarm clock at night before going to sleep. I would check it like a lot of times just to make sure that it was gonna wake me up at the time I wanted. So when I look back at that, I was like, oh, like yeah, for sure I had very obsessive tendencies, and now I'm able to channel those tendencies into the work. And there's also been a lot of personal growth and development that has helped me be more loose in certain aspects of my life. So there's that. But yeah, for sure I had some obsessive tendencies growing up. And, I mean, a lot of what I do comes from my experience as a child growing up. Like, I mean, I started embroidering as an adult man because it was something that was illicit for a boy growing up in Mexico City. It was something that my grandmother would never allow me to do. Right. And she would teach my sister to do it, but it was just... And it's not like she would... I don't think she ever actually said, no, you can't do that. Right. But just growing up and being sort of bombarded with those ideas, like I knew that it was like a no, like I couldn't even ask.
It's funny, I've heard you tell that story before, and I remember I started taking oil painting classes when I was 9, and I remember your story brings back the specific memory I have when I was probably 12 or 13. My grandmother did embroidery, hand embroidery with the same sort of thread, and my mom had been trying to do some of it on her own. And I remember going to my mom one day. Look, I'm interested in art. I'm interested in color and texture. And I'm painting, and I'm like, hey, I think I want to try some of this. And she's like, no,
yeah,
I don't think so.
Yeah,
and I know it was purely from like a gender role, sort of thing. Like I think it's going to be better off from a gender role if you go work on another painting, right?
Yeah.
And so
yeah, and I think in a way that. It's also what happened to me because, I have to give props to my mom because she always encouraged my sister and I to be very creative and to paint and to do something that had some sort of creative output. And we would go to museums a lot. And so we did grow up with a lot of culture.
Sure. And I understand Mexico City has great music. I haven't been to Mexico City, but
I don't know.
Everything I've always been told is that Mexico City has amazing museums.
It does, and I think it has. I don't know. I might be wrong, but I think I've heard it has the most museums per capita or something like that in the world. So there's amazing museums of many sorts, and. A lot of them are like free on Sundays and stuff like that. So, I feel I haven't been in Mexico for a long time, but I really feel that. People go to museums a lot more than they do here in the States.
Right.
Unless you're in New York, I guess, because like I was in New York a couple of weeks ago and. We went to MoMA on a Friday, and it was like, oh my God, it was a nightmare. So it was so full. So, but I think in general, people in Mexico are very culturally inclined, and there's not only museums, but there's philharmonic symphonies and And there's a lot of times just free concerts, and like there's a lot of access to culture that you don't necessarily have here in the States, just because it's more expensive here, or it can be more expensive here.
Sure. And so, when did you realize that? Have you always been an artist? I mean, was it just something you were always dabbling in, or was there a point, like, is there a specific memory that you have where, you all of a sudden woke up and were like, hey, I've gotten attention for my art and it's part of my identity?
Yeah. Well, like I said, I've always been very creative. So when I took my aptitude test in high school, and I think, the results were something like either graphic design or visual arts.
So you pursued both.
I do remember, and I remember I had a lot of interest in architecture as well, but the advisor told me something like, well, your math skills are not that good, so you better just stick with arts or graphic design. So, I do remember, it's funny because given all the access to culture that I did have, I also had some misconceptions about what art school was, and I never was really good at drawing like realistically. So I really felt that I was gonna fail if I went to art school because I couldn't, do a realistic figure drawing. And if I knew now if I knew then what I know now, I might have gone to art school.
Right.
But I decided to go to graphic design because I was pretty enamored of poster design at the time.
Okay.
So I really envisioned myself becoming some sort of like poster artist, and I love typography. I still do, and fonts, and I love calligraphy, and so I went to graphic design, and I actually loved doing graphic design, and I had an amazing program where actually it was like a 4-year program, and the first year and a half was the same base as the plastic, like the visual arts. So it was very connected to that,
Sure.
like the creating visually. It's just that in graphic design you have this idea of the purpose of what you're doing you have to communicate something that's really clear.
Right.
And it's not that you don't have that in art, but in art, it's so much looser. In design, you have a very specific function that you need to fulfill, and no matter how visually appealing what you do is, if it doesn't fulfill that function, you're failing as a designer. So, but yeah, it was an amazing hands-on program. I was that generation where computers were starting to be part of the program, but not a lot.
Right. And
we got really drilled into us that we shouldn't let the computer drive your design, which is, it's amazing advice that I think it's not given enough these days, but you have to come to the computer as a tool and not as a designing driver.
Right.
So it just drives me nuts whenever you see like a photo that's been obviously photoshopped and you can see the Photoshop filter. Right. It's the type of thing that they really made sure we didn't do at school,
Right.
which was great.
Where was the program?
It was in Puebla, Mexico. It's Universidad de las Americas, UDLA, UDLA. And at the time, we had one of the best design programs in the country.
Great.
So yeah, I was pretty fortunate to do that, and I mean I love doing graphic design, and I was really lucky to have jobs that allowed me a lot of creative freedom.
Right.
My first job out of college was. Oh, actually, I just had this flashback because my very, very first design job was at a TV station and working with this amazing guy who was really creative, and he was some sort of visionary in TV design, like TV bumpers and like for like the identity for a TV channel, but he was very difficult to work for, and he could be a little abusive. So I was like, fuck this. And like, I'm like, I can't do this. So I quit after like 2 months or something like that. And I don't know, I've never told that story. I don't know. And anyway, right after that, one of my passions was editorial design, like magazine design.
Right.
Like David Carson was my idol. I don't know if you know him. He used to be a graphic designer. I don't know what he does now because I haven't heard much from him, or I haven't really paid attention to what he's done recently. But he was, I don't know if you remember Raygun magazine in the 90s.
Right.
Like, that was really avant-garde design. I was like, I really wanted to be like David Carson. So I went to work to a magazine, and it was a pretty amazing experience. I met great people there, some of which I'm still friends with today. Even though, I mean, we don't really speak often or anything like that.
Right.
But if I were to be in a town where they are, I would still meet with them and hang out with them. And I mean, I loved it. And then I got a better job offer at a little bit more corporate design studio. And I hated it. Like, it's just not a good match. So is
that when you wound up going to? When did you go to? How did you get to?
Well,
Canada?
and that's where I was getting at. So after 6 months at that job, almost getting fired because of some catastrophic error I made, I just decided, okay, like, this is not for me. I just quit, and I went to Canada on vacation. I was going there for 2 weeks. I had a designer friend that I had met in college. She used to be a foreign exchange student at my university, and so I was like, hey, can I come and visit you for 2 weeks? And she was like, yeah, come on over. I brought my design portfolio, and I've never hustled myself like I, you know, I hate phone calls, but I forced myself to cold call. Like I took the local, the Quebec design magazine. Like my friend gave me this number, this issue where they were showcasing all the the awards, design awards, and so I just cold called everybody, and I was like, hey, I'm a designer from Mexico, and I'm here on vacation, and I kind of want to stay, so I was like, would you, can I come and show you my portfolio? And surprisingly enough, I don't know if the fact that I was from Mexico or like most of them said yes. And I did like 24 interviews in something like
Wow.